So the Dallas Mavericks are moving on to the Western Conference Finals, and not only was Game 6 out of control, but if I'm either Minnesota or Denver, I'm starting to get really, really scared of playing this Mavs team. Let's talk about the game first, though. This series has kind of mirrored a lot of what we've seen in the postseason so far, where we have games that feel tightly contested, but on the scoreboard, they're really not. Lots of blowouts, lots of teams getting out to big leads. And OKC was up 16 at halftime. They were up 17 at one point in the second half. And it's not necessarily that they blew the game, but obviously, giving up that big of a lead is a big, big deal. And for OKC, really what happened here is they just didn't shoot the ball well. And I really don't want the analysis of this series to be so reductive as just to say, hey, one team shot the ball well and the other didn't. But when you look at the second half shooting numbers and you think about all the big threes that Dallas made in this game, it's obviously really clear that that had a lot to do with the way Dallas was able to come back in the game. They started defending better, but a lot of this series came down to making shots, not making shots. In the first half, OKC looked like the team that they had looked like all season long because they were making their shots. Second half, not so much. Because the second half looked a lot like the periods in the series in which Dallas just looked like the better team. They started to kind of grind the game out. They focused a lot on just letting Luka and Kyrie, those guys, create for these other guys. Derek Jones, PJ Washington, those guys were making shots, and they were killing OKC on the offensive glass, especially the last 6 minutes of this game. There is play after play after play of someone getting a loose ball, someone getting on the offensive glass, getting multiple possessions, and ultimately, you can talk about the shooting on each side, you can talk about all that stuff, but that was the downfall of Oklahoma City at the end of the day, was that they didn't have anybody out there that they felt like they could trust to go and get the big rebounds against the Dallas team that has a ton of size against them. It's a huge advantage for them, and it just became too much for OKC to overcome. And if they get a couple more of those possessions in the last 5-6 minutes of the game, they certainly have a really good chance to win. Before we move on to Dallas, talking about them for the game, talking about them moving forward in the playoffs, we got to have an SGA moment here. Unfortunate, obviously, for him that OKC is not able to advance, even though they were the one seed in the regular season. But it's about as impressive of a playoff performance as we've had so far this postseason, certainly for the entirety of the series, especially when you consider a general lack of creators alongside SGA. And ultimately, I think that's a big reason why Dallas won the series as well, is they have 2 of the 3 best players in the series, and they have a couple of options they can go to when they need a bucket. And it became clear at the end of the game that the Thunder didn't have anybody other than Shea and obviously some Jalen Williams plays, but he was awesome in the fourth quarter. He was fantastic in the first half, and just it would feel wrong to talk about the game and not give a shout out to SGA, right? So let's talk about this for Dallas a little bit. When you're thinking about the way this Dallas team has been put together and how they're different from previous teams, it's the second time in 3 years they've made the conference finals. This is the most dangerous Mavs team that we've had in a long, long time, because there's so much more versatility and flexibility. And I think a lot of that was highlighted in this particular game, because previously, and we talked about this a little bit in a previous video, Dallas understandably wanted to create an environment that was as conducive to Luka being the center point of the offense as possible. They wanted spacing, they wanted shooting, they wanted to play small at times, and it was, hey, Luka, you go and create. A lot of the stuff that we saw from SGA tonight, where it was, man, we need this one guy to create everything for us, that's kind of the environment that Luka had been in for the past few seasons. But when they made the Kyrie trade, bring in PJ Washington, bring in Daniel Gafford, draft Derek Lively, bring in Derek Jones, obviously they went more in a direction of having length and size and leaning more on their defense, and then obviously having another creator alongside Luka in Kyrie, and all that stuff came together and it made sense. The thing that happened in this series, especially in the games that Dallas ended up winning, and especially in the second half of Game 6, is they had all those things that they added to the team. They had the defense, they had another creator in Kyrie, they had length, they had size, but then they also still had the shooting. They shot the ball extremely well in the second half. Derek Jones couldn't miss. PJ Washington obviously had really good moments throughout the series, and they kind of ended up with the best of both versions of the team. They kind of ended up with like this version that they had with Luka a handful of seasons ago, and then also this new version being able to guard, rebound, but all at the same time. And if that version of the Mavs shows up in the conference finals against whoever they would play as we're recording this video, Game 6 just ended, so we don't know who they're playing yet in the conference finals. And in either of those scenarios, if they shoot the ball well, like they're going to have plenty of opportunities to potentially make the finals here. I mean, if it's against Minnesota, it's kind of a similar situation from a perimeter creation standpoint, where obviously Minnesota has Ant. and they have some other offensive options, Karl Anthony Towns, whoever you might trust there. But Dallas has two guys that they completely trust late in games. That came true certainly in this game. And then for Denver, obviously they have Jokic and Murray, but Murray has not had a very good postseason. Again, maybe he had an awesome Game 7 by the time you're watching this video, but he has not had a very good postseason. And even though Kyrie, from a scoring perspective, has been a little bit down, he showed up in the second half and was a big reason why they were able to win in Game 6 here. And so I'm not trying to say necessarily that obviously Dallas should be the favorite or anything like that, regardless of who they end up playing in the conference finals. But they've created this team that somehow has been able to bridge the gap between previous versions of Dallas and this new version of Dallas. And it was such a night and day difference for them in this game in particular. And really, I think the interesting thing about this game is it was like this microcosm of everything we saw within the series, right? Like Game 1 for OKC, they were able to get out in transition a little bit. They had their spacing. They were hitting threes. That was the whole first half for OKC. They were guarding well. Other guys weren't making shots for Dallas. The role player guys weren't making shots. And SGA was awesome. Like, that was OKC all season long. They were going to hit their open threes. SGA was going to create. They were going to guard pretty well. And they were going to be up 16 at halftime. Like, that's what happened for them all year long. That's what happened for them in Game 1. And then the second half, things started to change certainly for them. Obviously, Dallas started hitting shots. And I really, like I said in the beginning here, I don't want, basketball analysis to just come down to, oh, well, this team made shots and the other didn't. But in this series in particular, there's obviously a lot more details to it. But for the most part, the team that shot the ball better won the games. And obviously, I don't want to make it seem like that's the only reason why this game went the way that it did. But again, just interesting kind of comparing the similarities of this game to some of the similarities of the season and of the series for each of these two teams. Now, the interesting thing for Dallas moving forward in the postseason is that regardless of who they play in the conference finals, that team is going to have certainly more options in the front court, more size, and the strength that Dallas showed on the offensive glass and with their size, their length, and their activity, that is going to be tested way more, obviously, in the conference finals than it was against OKC. And that was, one of their main advantages against OKC and one of the reasons why people thought they should have added big at the deadline, OKC, that is. And obviously, that's not going to be as big of an advantage. And they're going to need, these Derrick Jones, these PJ Washington kind of guys to continue to make shots for them against teams like Minnesota, like Denver, that can be as good as they can be defensively. And there's just going to be less margin for error. Like, as much as OKC was the 1 seed, and I still think they're really good, and they had every opportunity to win this series, certainly at least extend it to a Game 7, they just didn't match up well with this Dallas team. And Dallas clearly saw, some needs for them for themselves at the deadline, namely size, getting more, size in the front court. And it's worked out tremendously well for them, obviously, to get to the conference finals. So at the end of the day, congrats to the Dallas Mavericks making the conference finals. Hopefully Luka continues to get a little bit more healthy. I know he's dealing with the knee injury stuff. Gafford, I know, is dealing with a shoulder issue, but just a really, really impressive run so far for Dallas. I mean, there were points during the year where the Clippers looked like the best team in the league. They were able to deal with them in 6 games in the first round. And obviously OKC being the 1 seed in the conference as well. You can talk about their youth. You can talk about their inexperience, all that stuff. It's a very, very good team. It's no accident that Dallas was able to defeat them, obviously, even without home court advantage. And I'm extremely interested now to see not only who Dallas matches up with, which we're going to find out here in about 24 hours, but also just to see how that series develops. Because as much as we've had some cool individual games, right? Like, I think Philly, New York in the first round had some cool individual games. Certainly this Game 6 was really, really fun. Really want to see like a strong back and forth series, not blowouts on each side like Denver, Minnesota. And I think whoever Dallas ends up matching up with in the conference finals, regardless of how the series goes, is going to be tightly contested. It's going to be back and forth. And this Dallas team is looking very, very scary.